resume that one. All right, so we should have both Tegrity and Blackboard Collaborate recording, so that's the good news. I did get the exams for the on-campus students are graded. The online students, I should have them, I'm halfway through them. I should have those done and posted by tonight, maybe tomorrow morning at the latest. Overall, it looks like we had kind of a break between people either really got it or they really didn't. So it was kind of, there wasn't much kind of middle ground. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the exam. Let's see. I borrowed someone from on campus here to use as my key. So if this sounds familiar to your answer, that must mean that you have done well. Okay. What are the differences between job shops and flow shops? I was just kind of looking to make sure that you could distinguish between a job shop manufactures custom orders, flow shop manufactures the same product. Flow shops tend to be more assembly line manufacturing, and job shops would be more made-to-order manufacturing. I was really flexible on that. If you had looked in the textbook and come up with something that distinguished them, you got the 8 points. I was just kind of wanting to make sure that you went back to the basics and thought about job shops and flow shops and think about that as you're going to your different processes. Is what you're looking at more of a job shop or more of a flow shop? Okay. The next one, customers at a convenience store are served at an average rate of 30 customers per hour. On average, there are 3 people waiting in queue to be served. How long does the average customer wait in queue? Okay. In that situation, we've got inventory is equal to throughput times flow time, so that if we're looking for time, it's going to be inventory divided by throughput, right? So then we'd have inventory of 3 divided by throughput of 30 customers per hour gives us 0.10 hours, and we need to convert that to minutes, so times 60 minutes gives us 6 minutes. Okay. Question 3. Flow time of a claim through an insurance company office is on average 2 weeks. If daily demand averages 200 per week, what is the average inventory on hand? Inventory is equal to throughput times flow time. So 200 units per week times 2 weeks. The weeks cancel out and you have 400 units or 400 claims. Okay. At the entrance to the car wash, an average of 20 cars wait in line. Okay. The manager wants to determine if the length of the line is having any impact on potential sales. A study reveals that on average 4 cars per minute try to enter the line, but 10% of the drivers of these cars are dismayed by the long line and simply move on without entering the process. Assume that no car that enters the line leaves without a wash. On average, how long does a car spend in the car wash line? Okay, so we start out with an average of 20 cars are waiting in line. So that's must be our inventory. And our throughput is 4 cars per minute, but we only have 10%. We have 10% of them that are not ever even entering the process. So you take the 4 cars per minute times your 10%, and I think you get, what, 3.96 cars per minute? So I'm doing that in my head. Is that right? And then, what's that? 3.6. So 3.6 cars per minute. And then you're just using our regular formula. Inventory is equal to throughput times flow time, and we're solving for time. So inventory divided by throughput. So 20 divided by 3.6 gives us what? What does it get? 5.56. Okay. So that one was just, we had done a problem like that in class where we talked about the kind of an abandonment type approach, and so that's what we were dealing with there. Okay. In this next problem, at a college freshman orientation day, students come in at the rate of 120 per hour. So I know that students come in at 120 per hour, and actually I have the per hour up above. And so students wait in queue to pick up their schedules. After students pick up their schedules, they're directed to another office where an administrative review occurs to ensure the student has the appropriate documentation, and then they are forwarded on to a counselor. Schedules are reviewed and changes are made as necessary. On average, it is found that there are 10 students waiting to pick up their schedules. Okay, so in buffer 1, I have 10 students. Okay, 20 students are waiting to see an intern. which is for that administrative review process. So we're going to say that that's 20 students, and 30 students are waiting to see their counselor. So we've got 30 students, right? And we know here it's 120, stays all the way through because we have a stable process. And we have to convert that into students per minute. So if I want to convert 120 students per hour to students per minute, I'm going to take 120 per hour times 1 hour for 60 minutes. And that's going to give me 2 minutes, right? So then everything becomes 2. So we have the throughput all the way through. And then it says, on average, it takes the students 5 minutes to pick up their schedule. So I've got 5 minutes to pick up my schedule, 8 minutes for the administrative review, right? And 15 minutes to see their counselor, okay? And then when I'm done with that, right, I have 2 out of 3 for each and every one of these. So I can say that if I need inventory, its inventory is throughput times flow time, right? And if I need flow time, it's going to be inventory divided by throughput, right? So those are the 2 formulas I need. So throughput of 2 minutes, throughput of 2 students per minute times 5 minutes gives me an inventory of 10, right? An inventory of 16, and an inventory of 30. Everybody see how we get there? Okay. And then flow time. I'm sorry, ask me that again, Corey.
Can you tell me what the answers are down the line to make sure that I have the right one? Because I think I do, but
Yep. So inventory, if we go buffer 1 is 10, schedule pickup is 10, buffer 2 is 20, administrative review is 16, buffer 3 is 30, counselor is 30. Throughput is 120 all the way down for per hour, and its students per minute is 2 students per minute all the way down for throughput. Okay, and we were getting ready to do flow time, so our flow time for buffer 1 should be 10 divided by 2, which will be 5 minutes, right? For buffer 2, it'll be 20 divided by 2, which will be 10, and for buffer 3, it will be 30 divided by 2, which will be 15. So flow time.
okay, thank you.
Okay, good, good. Okay, so based on the information provided above, fill the table out. On average, how many students were in the total process? Well, I'm going to sum up my inventory. 10 plus 10 is 20, plus 20 is 40, plus 60 is 100, plus 16 gives me 116 students, right? And on average, how long did the students spend in the total process? The best way to get that is going to take the inventory divided by the throughput. So we have 116 students divided by 2 students per minute is going to give us 58 minutes, okay? Everybody tracking with that? Okay, good. All right. Let's go on to the last one, which basically just kind of divides that process into 2 segments at the end, right? And so a study has determined that 80% of the students simply require routine counsel, while 20% of the students have more complicated counseling. The process has been revised so that at the administrative review, students are directed to a counselor who can easily review an approved schedule, or to a more experienced counselor who can assist with more complex concerns. On average, it's found that there are 10 students waiting to pick up their schedules, 20 students waiting to see an intern, and 2 students waiting to see the routine counselor, and 1 student waiting to see the complicated counselor. On average, it takes a student 5 minutes to pick up their schedule, 8 minutes to work through the administrative review, and 5 minutes to see the routine counselor, and 20 minutes to see the complicated counselor. The throughput for the process remains the same as the previous problem of 120 students per hour. Okay, so again, not sure why that bounced back, but again, we're going to come here, and so our throughput is going to be 120 per hour all the way down through buffer 3, right? Up until buffer 3. And then what happens at buffer 3?
It's 80%.
Right, 80% stay at buffer 3 and for routine counsel, so 80% of 120 must be 96. And then the other 20% go through the buffer 4 and the complicated counsel, right? And if I convert this to students per minute, it stays at 2, 2, 2, and 2. 96 divided by 60 should give me 1.6, 1.6, 0.4, and 0.4. Okay, and from the problem, I know we're given the buffer, the inventory at each buffer. So there's 10 at buffer 1, there are 20 at buffer 2, there are 2 at buffer 3, and there is 1 at buffer 4. Okay, and so then I'm also for the activities, I'm actually given the flow time. So it's 5 minutes to schedule a pickup, 8 minutes for administrative review, 5 minutes for routine counsel, and 20 minutes for complicated counsel, right? And in that same way that we did before, I just know that for inventory, it's throughput times flow time, and for flow time, it's inventory divided by throughput, right? And so then I just need to crunch the numbers. So buffer 1, inventory of 10, throughput of 2 minutes per student, flow time is 5. For scheduling my pickup, okay, inventory is equal to throughput times flow time. 2 times 5 is 10. Okay. For buffer 2, I need to find the flow time. And so that's going to be inventory of 20 divided by 2 students per minute. So that should be 10. For administrative review, I need to find the inventory. So that's throughput times flow time. So 2 times 8 should give me 16. For buffer 3, I need the flow time. So it's inventory of 2 divided by flow time of 1.6 gives me 1.25 students. 1.25 minutes. For the inventory at the routine counsel, 1.6 times 5 should be 8. For the buffer flow time for buffer 4, 1 divided by 0.4 should be 2.5. And for complicated counsel, my inventory should be 0.4 times 20, which leaves me with 8. And if I sum all of these up, that's going to be 75 students, right? And my throughput of my process is 2 students per hour, so the average flow time for the whole process is going to be 37.5. Okay, so we filled out the table. On average, how many students were in the total process? We said 75 because we summed up all of the inventory. On average, how long did students spend in the routine counsel process? I had a couple people that just, I probably could have tried to come up with a clearer way to say that. I just took off a couple points for that. We had a problem like that where it said, where you go follow one path or the other, and we labeled those paths. If at the end of the semester, if that's you and you feel like that impacts your grade, you can come see me and we'll figure it out. But I don't think it's probably going to impact anybody's grade. But what you need to do is go, this path goes buffer 1, schedule pickup, buffer 2, admin review, buffer 3, and routine counsel. And we sum up how much time that is. And so that's, if I sum up all the way through routine counsel, that's 34.25 minutes. If I sum up everything but buffer 3 and routine counsel, which would be the other path, that's going to be 50.5 minutes. Okay? And then again, how we figure out through the whole process is we know how much inventory we have in the process, and we know how much our throughput is, so it's just inventory divided by throughput. 75 divided by 2 gives us 37.5. Okay? And is this revised process better for the patients? And so it shouldn't have said patients, it should have said students, and the answer to that is yes. Okay? Any questions about where we went with that? Okay? All right. Why don't you go ahead and hand those back in if you would. And I should have them, the online students should be finished grading by tomorrow morning, and I'll have grades posted by then too. Overall, how did it, was it what you expected? Harder, easier? What you expected? Yeah. Yes, no, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Such good feedback. I just don't know how I'm going to be able to
I
handle.
think you should make the test multiple choice.
Yeah. No, but thanks.
Oh. I mean, you wanted some feedback. It's my vote.
That's your vote. Well, I appreciate your vote. Let's go ahead and take a quick peek at the syllabus and talk about what we've got coming up. No big sighs. That means you're tired and you're thinking it's time to go home. No
Yep.
big sighs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are sitting here on September 29th. The Chapter 4 project had a due date on it today. When I posted that out there, I said, look, I have some flexibility. Some of you didn't get started. You all hadn't gotten the feedback back yet, but everybody else had, except for one student who's behind, is the bottom line. But that being said, try to get those turned in to me, and I'll try to turn the feedback right around. What we're going to do today is we're going to cover the Chapter 5 material, and you'll notice that there was problems for 15 points for Chapter 4 that we didn't have anything out there last week. You all were finishing up your tasks, and I think I shared already some of the stuff I had going on. What I'm going to do between now and probably Wednesday is I've started posting the Chapter 5 problems out there with the solutions, and it'll be just like you did for the Chapter 3. Well, you go to the discussion board, you'll look a problem, you'll post it, and you'll be able to see the solution that I have out there. And I put the solution, I've started it, and my intent is for each problem, there'll be one that I actually take a picture of and put out there so you can actually see the solution, and then I'll put another reply that actually has an Excel file with the solution in it so that you can open it up and play with the Excel file if you're having trouble, figuring that out. Yes, Amber?
Are we going to do Chapter 4 problems?
Yeah, but there's not going to be very many of them, so they'll
Okay.
be there, and those are so straightforward. I can't think you're going to have too much trouble with them.
Okay, I was just wondering.
Yeah, so I'll put Chapter 4 and Chapter 5 problems out there, and again, they should be out there by Wednesday. The bottom line is that on Thursday, Friday, and Monday, I'm doing campus visits with my son, and so we're not going to have class next Monday night. So,
Sweet.
now, Lauren, you really need to work on making you feel better.
Wow.
Go. Oh, well, that's too bad. But
Dang it.
You know what? I'm really happy that your son's going on college baseball. I'm just so happy.
That was what that was
he's
all
going
about.
further
We're
in
excited
his
for you
education.
and your son.
I'm so excited for this experience with you and your son.
There you
guys are
go.
gonna enjoy
That was a
the
good
company.
recovery. That was a good recovery.
You're welcome.
We love college.
College is my favorite thing in the whole wide world. And I just want to stay here forever and ever.
And ever, right.
But I only have 10 weeks left. So.
But who's counting, right?
But I'm not counting.
Well, and the bottom line is the way that we're doing the problems, we're not going to need to spend as much time in the classroom. I actually, you can give me some feedback as we continue through the class, but I think that's an effective way. We do examples in class tonight, and then you turn around and do the problems at the end of the textbook, and you can get immediate feedback. And I'm not counting off, if you get it wrong and you go back and figure out what you did wrong, you still get full points for it, right? I'm not taking off those points. It's about you working the problems and figuring out how they work. And I think that you get more of that working the problems and going and getting that feedback on your own than you do if I keep repeating the examples. I think at some point you just have to sit down and work the problems. And so that's why I've kind of gone to the approach of putting them up on the discussion board with the solutions available. And then when we come back on October 13th, right, we'll start covering Chapter 8. And again, because we're not meeting, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be working on your project stuff, right? So I'll be getting you feedback on that as quickly as I can. So this week you'll probably, here's in my mind how it works. This week you're working on the problems. You're getting those done by the end of this week. Next week you're coming back and you're working on your project because you'll have feedback from me on what to do with your project, okay? The reality of it is you can manage your time however you want, but that's what my vision of how the week's going as I'm trying to break the work up across the weeks. Okay? All right. Any questions about where we're at or where we're headed?
Does fall break start Wednesday or Thursday?
Thursday.
Technically Thursday.
Technically. Okay.
Yeah, I have it since I teach a class on Wednesday morning as well, and I'm thinking
You might as well just not go. No one's coming.
I'm thinking it's going to be pretty light. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
So, class dismissed.
Hey,
See you in 2 weeks.
guys, that was fun.
No,
I'm glad we
no,
shared
and no.
snacks.
But that was a nice try.
I mean,
That was a nice try.
no one else wants to try for these opportunities. I'm just helping everyone.
Yeah, you're just looking out for everybody, aren't you? Well, we're going to cover chapter 5, and chapter 5. So we've got inventory, throughput, and flow time. Okay, chapter 5 is about flow rate and capacity analysis, and it's going to start. If you're not careful, it's going to start to sound like I'm Charlie Brown's teacher, right? Yeah, the wah, 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 wah. So make sure that you're tuning into the subtleties when we go from one example to the next. Make sure you're asking questions if you're not following along. I recognize that it can start to sound very similar. So I'll do my best to try to make that not be the case, but you're going to have to work at it too. All right? So, chapter 5, flow rate and capacity analysis. If you think about what we're trying to look at with flow rate and capacity analysis, you think about the demand for cars in China. Okay, so companies are striving to match their capacity with their expected demand by making sure they have the right resources and by maximizing the effectiveness of which those resources are utilized. So, again, the wah, 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 wah. Let's break that down. So what we're saying is, if you think about a process that has multiple resources that are used in the process, okay, and anything where you've got levels of training is a good example, okay? So let's think about a doctor's office. You have the receptionist, you have a nurse, and you have a doctor. Do you ever want the receptionist to be the limiting factor for how many people are actually flowing through that process? They are the least expensive resource that you've got, right? So you always are trying to maximize the capacity, trying to look at that, that doctor and saying, okay, he's the one that's the expensive resource here. Let's make sure that we're fully utilizing him. Okay, so that's kind of what we're talking about in this chapter, is how do we look at the different resources that are in play, and we'll talk generally at first about different resources in play, and they can all be equal, right? And we're going to look at capacity and where our bottlenecks are, and then we're going to break that down into, okay, well then let's turn around and let's look at, well, what if they have different values associated with them, okay? So flow rate measurement. Throughput, or the average flow rate of a stable process, is the average number of flow units that flow through the process per unit of time. Okay, throughput is expressed in terms of flow units per time. Okay, so from chapter 4, the average flow rate or throughput of a stable process can be measured by the following 3-step process. I can either observe the process over a given extended period of time, measure the number of flow units that are processed by the process over a selected period of time, or compute the average number of flow units per unit of time. I have 3 choices in how I can go about figuring out that flow rate. Okay. Lauren, in 343, we learned about takt time.
Did we?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So takt time is basically customer demand, right? That's what we learned in 343. And so takt time says, how often do I need a unit coming off of my production line? Well, what we're learning in this textbook is that that's just the reciprocal of throughput. So throughput is units per time. Takt time is time per unit. So it's just the reciprocal of it. And it represents the average activity time at each workstation. Because if my activity time at a given workstation is longer than takt time, it's not coming off the production line at that drum beat that I need it to come to meet customer demand. Okay? 5.2, resource and effective capacity. Activities within a process are performed by both capital and labor resources. So when we talk about resources, we can be talking about equipment or we can be talking about labor. Okay, and so as we start to look at our processes and find out what our capacity is and what our utilization is, we're not necessarily just looking at one or the other. It can be either. Okay, each activity may require one or more resource, and each resource may be allocated to one or more activity. So again, to me, that could be the what. Okay, what we mean is, if you think about in bread making, you could have activities like mixing the ingredients, kneading the dough, forming the loaves, placing them in the oven, and baking them. Okay, and you could have resources like a baker. Right? And that baker could be a general baker and be used for all of those activities, right? So I've got a baker, and he can mix, knead, and form the dough, okay? Similarly, a given activity such as loading the oven may require multiple resources, such as the baker and the oven, right? You've got both the labor and the capital resource. So a resource pool is a collection of interchangeable resources that can perform an identical set of activities. So our baker could be considered a resource pool because all your bakers are going to do the same thing, okay? And so our baker could be called the resource unit, okay? So if we have 3 flexible bread bakers, each who can perform any of those activities, they'd be viewed collectively as a single resource pool containing 3 units because they can all do the same thing, okay? On the other hand, if each of the 3 bakers specialized in a separate activity, one mixed, one kneaded, one formed the dough, and so they weren't interchangeable, then they would each be regarded as 3 separate resource pools with 1 resource unit in that pool. Okay, do you see the difference there? Okay. Again, it's not hard, but I can see where if we weren't tracking it, we could get lost in the shuffle. All right. Resource pooling is combining separate resource pools into a single, more flexible pool able to perform several activities. So maybe taking those bakers and combining them back up. That would be considered resource pooling. Okay. When we talk about effective capacity, the unit load of a resource unit is the average amount of time required by that unit to process one flow unit. So given the way the resource is utilized by the process. So the unit load of a resource unit, the average amount of time. So if it takes a baker 5 minutes to mix the dough, given that's the unit load of that resource unit, the average amount of time required for the resource unit to process one flow unit. Effective capacity of a resource unit is the inverse of that. Okay? And what you'll notice is when we work the problems later on, if you set your tables up like I have them set up in the example problems, it's going to make a whole lot more sense to you as you go through it. I always try to organize these problems, and I put the resource unit in the left-hand column, and then the next one over is going to be or the unit load in the left-hand column, and then the effective capacity comes right after that because it's just 1 divided by that. Okay, and so again, if you kind of watch how those examples are set up, that should help you when you go to do your problems as well. Okay. Effective capacity of a resource pool is the sum of the effective capacities of all the resource units in that pool. Okay, so, and we'll look at an example and I'll point that out, what we're talking about. So, our example, a resource unit is the insurance agent. Okay, a flow unit that we're going to look at is going to be a filed residential insurance claim. Assume that on average the agent spends 12 minutes per claim. Okay, 12 minutes per claim is the unit load. That's how long that resource spends on that flow unit. Okay, therefore the effective capacity of the resource unit is the inverse of that. So it's 1 over 12 minutes per claim. Okay, and if we convert that into claims per hour, we're going to take 60 minutes per hour times 1 over 12 minutes per claim, and gets us to 5 claims per hour. Okay, and that's the capacity, is claims per hour. The effective capacity of the resource pool, and here's where the formulas come in. The unit load at a resource pool is T sub I, and the number of resource units is C sub I. Okay, so effective capacity is how many resource units do you have, C sub I divided by T sub I. No process can produce output any faster than its bottleneck, The bottleneck is the slowest resource pool of the process. Thus, effective capacity of a process is the effective capacity of whatever your bottleneck is.
Did we learn this in 343?
Yes.
No.
Part of it?
We
Did we
learned
read?
bottleneck.
Did we read about a bottleneck?
We talked about a bottleneck in 343. We did talk about
I
a bottleneck.
remember a bottleneck
Good,
in
good.
tap time, but I never understood it. But I remember reading it.
Okay. Well, and so where we're at then, we're going to work a few examples tonight that's going to bring some of this home, right? And so if I'm you and I'm going back to kind of study this chapter and working on my problems, I kind of have the PowerPoints maybe printed out so you can kind of flip back and forth between the problems that we're going to work and the wording to talk about, to make sure that you're tracking with that wording. Okay? So here's the example 5.1 from our textbook, right? And it's probably going to be a little boring, but I'm going to read the example from the textbook, and then we're going to talk about the table that's up here. So example 5.1 is on page 104. So health maintenance organization, HMOs, provide their customers with all-inclusive medical service for a fixed monthly fee. To secure services, they contract with physicians and hospitals that provide their services on a fee-per-service basis. When members of an HMO receive medical service, the providing physician or hospital submits a claim to the HMO for reimbursement. New Life Finance is a service provider for HMOs. For a small fee, it performs the entire claims processing operation on behalf of the HMO. Okay, this is how I set my tables up. Put your resource pools all the way in the left-hand column, and that's the sub-I, right? And so in this example, we have a mailroom clerk, a data entry clerk, a claims processor, and a claims supervisor, okay? And we're told that each time a mailroom clerk handles the flow unit of the claim, it takes them 1 minute. It takes a data entry clerk 5 minutes. It takes the claims processor 8 minutes, and the claims supervisor 2.5 minutes, okay? Again, in the simplest example we've got, we go resource unit, unit load, effective capacity. So effective capacity is the inverse of our unit load. So I take 1 divided by 1 gives me one claim per minute. A data entry clerk is going to be 1 divided by 5 minutes, so it takes 2/10 of a claim per minute. Okay. The claims processor is 1 divided by 8, or 0.13, and a claims supervisor is 1 divided by 0.4, or 1 divided by 2.5, or 0.40. All right. Then we say, but we may have more than one of these resources, right? Well, I really only have 1 mailroom clerk. I have 8 data entry clerks. I have 12 claims processors, and I have 5 claims supervisors. So this column, the third column, is the effective capacity of a single resource unit. In order to get the effective capacity of the resource pool, I need to take the effective capacity of a resource unit and multiply it times the number of units that are actually in that pool. Okay, so it's 1 times 1 is 1. 0.2 times 8 says, well, I can actually, with the number of people I have working, we can process 1.6 claims per minute. My claims processor is 0.13 times 12, or 1.5 claims per minute in that resource pool. My supervisor is 0.40 times 5, or 2 claims per minute in that pool. Okay, so which one is the bottleneck? Which resource pool is my bottleneck?
Supervisor, claims supervisor.
And actually, it's the other way around. It's who does the lowest amount, right? My bottleneck is where I have the lowest amount of flow units per pool. Okay? So my bottleneck is going to be, because you can think about bottlenecks in 2 ways. If I talk about bottlenecks in terms of unit per time, it's the lowest number of units. If I talk about bottlenecks in terms of time per unit, it's the highest amount of time, right? So you have to recognize whether or not you're talking about units per time, and then it's the lowest number, or if you're talking about time per unit, then it's the highest number. Okay, so in this case, when we're talking about effective capacity, we're talking about claims per minute. So it's units per minute, so it's the lowest number. Okay? And then it says, well, how many professionals are required to achieve capacity of, say, 80 claims per hour? Okay? And in order to get that, we would take our effective capacity.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
What's the bottleneck? I got lost.
The mailroom, I think.
So it's not the supervisor. So is it the processor?
It is the So
Or
Mailroom.
it is the mailroom, but it is the mailroom because we're talking about units per time. So if you think about that, the bottleneck is going to be the one that can do the most units or the fewest units. The fewest, right?
See, that one up there isn't a minute, it's a claim.
It's a claim
So
per
the
minute.
mailroom only does
so
one
we're
claim
looking
a
at
minute.
number
Very
of
far,
units. Oh, that.
Claims
we're
per
looking at-
That's why I said the supervisor, I thought it took 2 minutes to do a claim. And so that's why I said that, but it's
Oh.
not 2 minutes to do the
See, you threw
claim.
me off.
They do, well, hey,
God, stop
sorry.
asking questions.
but that's why.
Okay.
Thank you.
No
I'm
fault.
sorry. Continue.
No, but I think that's good because I'm sure if you have that question, other people are going to have that same kind of a question. I am so sorry.
We know you did it on purpose.
I'm sorry. I'm going to take this for a quick second.
Don't forget to turn your mic off.
Can you repeat that again? It's claims per minute?
We're looking
Mike,
at the effective capacity
when
of
I
a
looked
resource
at it,
pool.
I thought it was how many minutes it took them to make a claim.
Okay.
And so, if that's what that last column was, then I'd been right about the supervisor, because it's the longest point, the slowest point. But I couldn't see where it said claims per minute. I thought it was minutes per claim.
So the bottom's doing 2 per minute?
Yeah, so that makes it
Okay.
faster actually.
Okay.
And the top one only does 1 claim a minute, so it makes it the
Okay.
slowest point. But when I was reading it as it took them 2 minutes to do a claim. And so then my big mouth answered it, and I was wrong.
So maybe, I guess it has to have those decimals because of the middle numbers
Yeah,
have
or-
no decimals.
Yeah.
Good. Maybe if it was a 1 and a 2, we could get it better.
That's how I messed up so much on my test. It was just,
Oh,
it was just little things. Like, I mean, I made it make a 74, and I could easily took away 12 points of just stupid mistakes. I bet I lost 8 points. She took 2 points off like everything I didn't like put. So say the answer's 400, and I just put I equals 400.
Oh, you didn't label what it was.
I equals 400, claims.
Oh, okay.
Minus 2. Well, bull crap, I did the thing right. But I understand, like, it's technical or whatever, but.
I just found a really disturbing article from back home.
What's it about? Now you have to share it with me.
7 high schoolers off of the JV football team at my old high school got caught beating up a kid at school. It was a kid's birthday, and the 7 kids were like, they gotta get their special licks
Similar to Subway.
for his birthday, like,
Yeah,
Spank on the butt
today's my
type of
sister's
thing.
birthday. I gave her her spankings yesterday.
But
It was great.
they whipped him like
Oh.
with belts and like
Oh.
beating him up and all that stuff.
I mean, I didn't beat her up. She may or may not have been stuck on the ground, but
But
I got my 18 spanks in.
I wouldn't doubt anything like that would happen. Because
Oh my
my sophomore or junior year of high school, there was the wrestling team. We're at a hotel for like a invitational thing, and there was like the older group
Yeah, senior and freshman.
sexually assaulted a freshman
What?
in a hotel. Sorry.
That's okay.
I had a disturbing article I found online about my old high school,
Ooh.
and I wouldn't even doubt it either. It's because
A kid got beat up on his birthday.
in the locker room.
That's
in the football locker room.
That's the second worst day to get beat up on. Christmas is the worst.
Yeah, Christmas was the worst.
Christmas and your birthday.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry that I stopped class, but I have a friend who's in Nashville. She's got something that they're calling the bottom line is she's got spinal fluid pressure built up on her brain, and her son is staying with us, and so it was her, and so I just wanted to check and make sure they monitored her pressure today, and they may go in and do surgery tomorrow, or they may, if they can't get her in tomorrow, they may wait until next week.
She
So,
Vanderbilt?
yes.
Yeah,
she
I
is.
have a cousin down there with a similar problem.
Is that right?
Fluid on the brain. They put a shunt in.
That's exactly
and
what they're going to
they
do.
Filtered it to her stomach.
That's
And then now she's got like some infection in her stomach from the fluid from the brain. And
Oh,
so
no.
She's I think she's okay now, but she'd had that mess happen like last year or something.
Yeah. So anyway, she's got one son that's my son's age, and then a daughter that's a couple years younger than that. So anyway.
How old? Your son's going to college.
He's going
to
to college. They're going on college visit.
I'm about to say how old your son, but I was like, never
He's
mind.
12. He's really smart.
I believe it.
So I appreciate your understanding with me, just kind of pausing and going to check on it, and then I'm just again relieved everything's okay. So.
I really don't think anyone's offended that you answered yourself.
If it's anything.
Yeah.
I really don't think we're
It wouldn't have
offended.
been a problem anyway.
No.
Well, let me tell you, on the flip side of that, I might be offended if you answered a call that was
okay.
not an emergency. So
If I get a call and I leave, I better come back with a really good excuse.
that's right. It better be some kind of an emergency. That's right.
Sorry.
Sorry.
My dog was trapped in a whale. And
I had one girl last year that, you know, it's just sometimes people just bring drama with them, right? You know, and she was all about she was having car trouble, and so she was on the phone with her coach. She was an athlete, and her mom and her, you know, she had like 3 phone calls in like inside an hour, and she was in tears, and I'm like,
About car trouble?
yes.
Did she like have to walk 30 miles to get to class?
That was kind of where I was at, so I don't know how serious.
her battery was dead.
Yeah. That's, you know, that is kind of what I was thinking. I'm like, okay, I really don't know. It could have been that bad, right? So you never know what people are going through, so you just try to be understanding.
Yeah.
All right, so let me pull it back to effective capacity of a resource pool. And so if we want to figure out how many professionals we actually need, we come back and we say, well, if I want to do 80 claims per hour, right, and I can come back over here and I can say, well, they can do 1 claim per minute, 0.2 of a claim per minute, 0.13, 0.40. I convert my 80 claims per hour to how many per minute I need, right? So 80 claims per hour would be 80 claims per hour converted to claims per minute.
It's like
1 point
1.2
something.
Let me do the math. Do 80 divided by 6, correct?
It's 1.33.
And
1
so,
point,
and so then I would take that times the number of claims per minute that each resource unit was able to do, and that would tell me how many I would need. Okay? So I take 1.0 times 1.33, should say I would need they're not doing it the same way we are, but that's the bottom line, is that you would take the 1.33 times 1, so you would need 1.33 mail clerks, right? And so you'd need an extra third of a mail clerk. Okay, 0.20 times 1.33. What's that? 1.33 times 0.20?
1.333
So that's 1.
times 0.20.
Mm-hmm.
0.26.
So you have more than enough data entry clerks, right? Because you've got 5. Okay, and then 1.33 times 0.13.
0.17.
Yeah, so you've got plenty of claims processors. So that's what you're doing, is you're working your way back through that to
Now,
figure out how many professionals you would need.
In a business sense, so we only need a third more of a mail clerk to be able to produce 80.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't hire a third of a mail clerk. So how do you go about without having to
You just hire another
you
one?
just hire another one and just take the expense, and now you can do 85 an hour, or do you somehow use those other guys to do something else, like move somebody?
Well, and there are lots of choices there. What we'll work on is we do a little bit more. So this is kind of just a real straightforward example. What we'll start to look at is that we might have a mailroom clerk, and instead of saying that we have 1 mailroom clerk available, maybe we only have 6 hours of a mailroom clerk time available in a day, and maybe they spend 2 hours doing other things, right? And so we'll start to look at that and dive a little deeper. And in my mind, that's what you're going to start looking at is you wouldn't probably hire someone for a third of a position, especially if these other people weren't maxed out. On the other hand, you might look at it and say, how expensive are the other people? If they're that expensive, maybe I want to hire someone else, and maybe I can actually increase it over 80 claims per hour, right? So it depends. That's the MBA answer, right? If you're ever in an MBA class.
It depends.
Yep.
I like it.
It depends, and then you have to explain why it depends, but it does.
Because.
It depends, because I said so.
For capacity utilization, the throughput of a process may not equal the capacity because of external or internal constraints. external constraints can be you don't have enough sales, right? That can be considered an external constraint. Internal constraints could be that maybe you have a bottleneck in another location, and so that's why you're not able to have throughput equal capacity. Therefore, it's important to calculate utilization, and utilization is U sub I, and U sub I is equal to throughput divided by the effective capacity of that resource pool. Okay? So don't you know we're going to do an example of that? Okay? Example 5.2. Assume that the average number of claims processed by the New Life Finance during a given month was measured to be 400 per day. Okay? And so the effective capacity of the various resources is as indicated in the second column of table 5.2. Okay? So we've copied that column over here. So we've taken the effective capacity of a resource pool, and we know that a mailroom clerk is 1 claim per minute, a data entry clerk is 1.6 claims per minute, a claims processor is 1.5 claims per minute, and a claims supervisor is 2 claims per minute. Okay? The third column of the table lists the capacity utilization of the various resources. Okay? All right. So we've got the effective capacity, and we can do 1 claim per minute, and we know that there are basically 480 minutes in a day, 8 hours times 60 minutes. So 1 times 480 gives us 480 is how many they can process in a day. 1.6 times 480 gives us 768. 1.5 times 480 gives us 720, and 2.0 times 480 gives us 960. Okay? So our actual throughput, though, is 400 claims per day. Okay? So our capacity utilization is our throughput divided by what they could actually do if they were full speed ahead, right? So 400 divided by 480 is 83% utilization. 400 divided by 768 is 52% utilization. 400 divided by 720 is 56% utilization. 400 divided by 960 is 42% utilization. Okay?
Is there just a typo in the book? It says 480 divided by 960 for the supervisor. Is that just a typo?
That's a typo.
Okay.
Yep, that's a typo. Good catch. Okay.
Double check.
So what do we notice about the utilization of the bottleneck? Which resource pool was our bottleneck?
Mailroom clerk.
Okay, so our mailroom clerk was our bottleneck. What do we notice about the utilization of the mailroom clerk in comparison to the other resources? Yeah, it's the highest utilization, and that's typically what you're going to see.
So basically the supervisor's not doing anything.
Like in all cases.
Now, someday when you're a supervisor, you might see that slightly differently, but I can appreciate the sentiment. Okay. What other factors affect capacity? We're going to make some assumptions. We assume that resources handle units sequentially or 1 unit at a time rather than load batches. We assume all resources are available for the same amount of time. That was what we did in that first set of examples. And we've ignored the effects of setups or switching between products. Okay? And we addressed some of those issues in Chapter 5, and then that last issue is addressed in the appendix for Chapter 5. Okay? Product mix has an effect on effective capacity and the profitability of a process. And it isn't always quite as straightforward as what you might think, right? If I told you that one unit had a contribution margin of $20, or one product type A had a contribution margin of 20, and product B had a contribution margin of 25, it'd be pretty tempting to say, well, we should just do more of B, right? But
is there more profit in B?
But that's the issue, is how much time does it take us to actually process them? So we have to drive to that. So such decisions affect the process capacity. A major driver of profitability, input from the operations group, which is responsible for production, is required. I like the way they phrase that here, right? They make it definitive, like it must be. Well, it should be, is the bottom line. It isn't in all cases, in all companies. Okay, so in 5.3, example 5.3, we're going to compute the effective capacity for hospital claims, okay? And in so doing, we're going to look at 2 different types of claims, and then we're going to determine which one is actually the more profitable of the 2 for us, okay? And so as we look at that, we start out with Assume that in addition to processing physician claims, which is what we looked at in these first examples were physician claims, New Life also handles claims submitted directly by hospitals. The process used to handle hospital claims is the same. However, the unit loads required for the various operations are different. Okay, so Table 5.3 contrasts the unit loads, and that's kind of what I've recreated up here is Table 5.3, okay, for the two types of products. So for a physician, right, we had our minutes per claim of 1, 5, 8, and 2.5 for the different categories. For our hospital, we have mailroom clerk of 1.5, data entry clerk of 6, claims processor of 8, and a claims supervisor of 4.0. Okay, so as we continue on and we say, well, let's redo what we worked with before for our physician, and let's just do that for our hospital claim. Okay, so I have my resource pool, I have my unit load. To get my effective capacity, what do I have to do?
1 divided by T sub I.
Yep, it's just the inverse. So it's 1 over 1.5 gives me 0.67, right? And I just do that all the way down, okay? And then the number of units in the resource pool, we have 1, 8, 12, and 5. And so to get the effective capacity of that pool, I take it times the effective capacity of one resource unit in that pool times the number of resources that I have in that pool. Does that make sense? Okay. Think about it like this. We know that one data entry clerk can do 0.17 claims per minute. And I have
8.
8 data entry clerks. And that's what this column is. The number of units in that resource pool, that's just telling me that I have 8 data entry clerks. So if I'm interested in how many, what the effective capacity of that whole resource pool is, I take, well, if one can do 0.17 claim per minute, 8 of them then times 8 times 0.17, they can do 1.33 claims per minute.
Oh, okay.
Okay? So it's just terminology. It's not that what we're doing is that complicated. It's just adjusting to a different terminology. Okay? And so now all we're saying is, well, then this is how many claims per minute each resource pool can do. 0.67, 1.33. So claims per minute, 1.50, 1.25. Okay? So given these claims per minute, okay, and think about what we talked about with bottlenecks. We can look at units per time, and it should be lower units is our bottleneck, right? Or time per unit, and higher time becomes our bottleneck. What's effective capacity? Units per time or time per unit?
Units per minute per time.
Yep. So that being the case, which one of these is my bottleneck?
The mailroom clerk.
Still the mailroom clerk, right? Okay. So we've just kind of recalculated the same thing we did for the physician's claims with the hospital claims. Okay. And now we're going to start to look at, well, what's the difference in terms of product mix? So for a process that produces several types of products simultaneously, like hospital claims and doctor claims, we can represent the overall flow of various products by constructing what we call an artificial flow unit. Okay? And that represents the entire mix of the various products. All right? We can calculate the unit load of the mix by averaging the unit loads of the individual products using the weights of the mix as illustrated in 5.4. So here's what we're doing in 5.4. New Life handles 60% physicians' claims and 40% hospital claims. Okay? So here is that table that we had at the top before that was just comparing the unit loads, right? 1 minute per claim, 5 minute per claim, 8 minutes per claim, 2.5. Let's come back and go from here. So our unit load, right, is this very first column. And when we're calculating our artificial unit load, all we're doing is taking a weighted average. So if I have 60% physician and 40% hospital, I'm going to take 60% of 1 and 40% of 1.5, and my artificial unit flow is going to be 1.20. So really what we're saying is on average with all of the different types of claims that mailroom clerk utilizes, they can process 1.2 claims per minute, or minutes per claim, 1.2 minutes per claim. Okay? That's on average the amount of time it takes them. And we do that for each of these and take that weighted average. So 5 times 60% plus 6 times 40% for our data entry clerk, that's 5.4 minutes per claim. Our claims processor is 8 and 8. That's pretty easy. It's still going to be 8. And our claims supervisor is 2.5 times 60% and 4 times 40%. That's 3.1. Okay? So I construct my table just like I did before. I have my resource pool. I have my artificial unit load, and then I'm going to get my effective capacity of that resource unit by taking the inverse, right, of that unit load. So 1 over 1.2, 1 over 5.4, 1 over 8. So that second column again is just, when I go for effective capacity, it's the inverse. And then, just like what we did before, I say, well, how many resources are in that pool? And I multiply this effective capacity of the resource unit times the number of resources in the pool, and that tells me the effective capacity of that resource pool. Okay? Again, it's the terminology. You're just going to have to tie into what each of those columns represent. So can we determine which of the two claims processed is more profitable?
Yes.
We can. To answer this question, we need to supplement the data on capacities for the two products with some financial information concerning revenues and variable costs. Okay? So our physician claims are revenue of $5.50 and variable cost of 50 cents. Our hospital claims are $6.75 and variable costs of 75 cents, leaving our unit contribution margin at $5 for a physician claim and $6 for a hospital claim. Right? It might be easy at this point to try to assume that, well, then the hospital claim must be the better deal. Okay? But we haven't looked at that in terms of the cost that is associated in terms of how much time it takes us to do that. Okay? Unit contribution margin of each flow unit is the revenue less all of its variable cost. Okay? And we know from our effective capacity that we can do 60 physician claims per hour and 40 hospital claims per hour. Okay? And so if that's the case, if I can do 60 of these per hour and 40 of those per hour, 60 times my contribution margin is $300, and 40 times my contribution margin is only $240. So it actually is more profitable for us to do physician claims. Okay? So the relevant criterion in determining profitability of products is not the contribution margin per unit, but it is the contribution margin per unit of time, right? We have to think about that as we're determining which one is most profitable. Okay? All right, section 5.4 in our textbook talks about capacity waste and theoretical capacity. And this is going to be tied to, we've talked about waste and capacity before. Theoretical capacity is in that perfect world, right? And what brings waste to a process might be if you have a resource that breaks down, if you have to do maintenance on it, if you have to have quality rejects, if you have rework, if you have setup between different product batches, and if you have non-value adding activity. As you go into the next phase of your project, I think you're going to be asked to put together a list of all the activities that need to be done in your process. And you'll have to identify whether or not they're value add or not value add. Okay? Do you know kind of the definition that you would use for value add or not value add?
By doing this, am I making money? Simple.
That is part of it. So how I would phrase it is, by doing this, is this something that the customer is willing to pay for? So if the customer is not willing to pay for it, if you're not transforming the product in some way that the customer is willing to pay for it, it's not value added. Now, sometimes you're going to do things that are necessary but not value added, right? Like moving things across your facility. That, you have to do it. You have to get it from point A to point B. But your customer is not necessarily wanting to pay for you to drive around your facility a bunch of times with the product, right? So that's not value added. So you try to take out as much of that as you can. So not value added means it's something that the customer, it transforms the product and the customer is willing to pay for it. Okay? So, and I qualify it like that because if I'm working on a production line, here's a prime example. Pella windows, vinyl window coming down the production line. There's a welder and that takes the vinyl and welds the pieces together. And so then you get a corner, and in that corner, if the welder works right, there's no extra material. And if the welder doesn't work right, the worker has to reach down and clip out the extra material so that that weld looks right. Okay? Well, that is transforming the product, but it's not value added because the equipment should work right, and the person shouldn't have to reach in there and do that activity. Okay? And so you have to think about kind of what they're doing and why they're doing it.
But you see, I would pay for that worker if I were buying this pillow window for them to clip off the excess material because it looks
But
good.
if my competitor had equipment that worked right and didn't have to do that and they could offer a lower price because of that,
Oh, okay.
would you?
I understand.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's where the value add activity comes in.
Okay.
Capacity waste and theoretical capacity. So the unit load is an aggregation given the way the resources are currently being utilized, both productive as well as wasted time. So we've got both of that mixed in. Okay? So if capacity waste is large, we might want to think about how can we look at waste elimination and thus segregate the wasted capacity. Okay? The theoretical unit load of a resource unit is the minimal amount of time required to process a flow unit if all waste were eliminated. So in the perfect world, if all you did were the things that you needed to do, how long would it actually take you to do it? Okay? And the theoretical capacity of the resource unit is the reciprocal of the theoretical unit load, right? So theoretical unit load and theoretical capacity look just like they have in that table where we've got column 1 is the unit load, column 2 is the capacity of the resource unit, which is just that reciprocal. Okay. Theoretical capacity is highly idealized and seldom attainable notion of capacity, but it has value for us in analysis. Okay? Its usefulness is derived from the fact that it estimates the waste in the system and forms the basis for finding an action plan to start eliminating that waste. Okay? So example 5.6 from our textbook. If we've got an operating room, which is our resource unit of a hospital which specializes in cataract surgery, on average the hospital manages to perform a surgery every 30 minutes. So that's the unit load. I do a surgery every 30 minutes. Thus the effective capacity is 2 cases per hour. Okay? Suppose that it's estimated on average 33% of the operating room time is wasted cleaning, restocking, changing of nursing staff, fixing malfunctioning equipment, and so forth. And therefore, the theoretical unit load can be estimated to be 30 times 1 minus 33%, which is 20 minutes, yielding a theoretical capacity of 3 cases per hour. Okay? And so you calculate the theoretical capacity. The formula that we use for that is our effective capacity, okay, of 2 units per hour divided by 1 minus our waste factor. So if we say that, and that formula is on page 110 of your textbook, okay? I find that students are confused by that capacity waste factor, and so I'm trying to think of a better, I found that in the past. So, just think of it this way. It's the things that you're doing that aren't, adding value. And so, so if I'm trying to determine how much I could actually do in the perfect world, I can take how much I'm doing today, and let's say that 20% of my time is wasted. Well, if I take what I'm doing today and divide it by 80%, that's going to give me what I could do if I were in the perfect world. And that's what we're doing with this 1 minus the capacity waste factor. Because you're saying 100% of my time is spent between waste and value add. And so if I take out the waste chunk and run that calculation of what I'm doing today divided by what percent of that time is actually value added, that's going to give me this theoretical capacity. So you'll just have to work through a problem or two like that, I think, before it kind of gels for you. Okay? What we do know that when we manage our throughput, that small changes in throughput can translate into large changes in profit. Okay? And this magnification is what we call the throughput profit multiplier. Okay, and we calculate that by saying the percent change in profit divided by the percent change in throughput. And don't you know, we have an example. Example 5.7, right? Consider a process with the following economics of operation. The fixed cost of owning and operating the resources amounts to $180,000 per month. Okay, the revenue is $22 per unit, and the variable cost is $2 per unit. So our contribution margin is $20 per unit. Okay, in July 2010, the throughput was 10,000 units, and so our profit was $20 per unit times 10,000 units minus our fixed costs gives us $20,000 in profit. Okay, let's say then that we are able to eliminate waste and improve the output in August by 1%. Okay, so instead of 10,000 units, now we have 10,100 units. And so we recalculate our profit, and it's $20 per unit times 10,100 units minus $180,000 of fixed cost gives us $22,000 of profit. Thus, a 1% increase in throughput has resulted in a 10% increase in profits. And that's because your fixed costs are already covered, right? So that's why you get that magnifier effect, okay? And so that being said, if we were going to calculate it just by looking at the throughput profit multiplier, contribution margin is $20 per unit. That was given to us in the example. July profit per unit is 20,000 divided by 10,000 is $2 per unit. So if I'm looking at that profit multiplier, my contribution margin of $20 divided by my profit per unit of $2 says that I'm going to get that 10% multiplier, and so it matches exactly what we calculated over here. A 1% increase makes a 10% increase in profits. So that's what we're saying, is that this 10 says we're going to get a 10% increase in profits. Okay? All right. So here's one that I ask you to include in your project because I want to make sure you understand how these three relate to each other. Okay? Throughput, capacity, and theoretical capacity. Okay? Throughput is the actual of what you're really doing, right? How many units are you actually getting through in a process, units per time. Capacity is based on your current system, what are you capable of doing, okay? And theoretical capacity is in the perfect world, okay, right? So if that's the case, our throughput is going to be less than our capacity, and when it's significantly less, we would say that our bottleneck is external because we're not bumping into capacity. We just don't have enough sales to run through our business, right? And so we could work on taking waste out of the process all we want, but unless we do something about getting more business in, we're not going to make any, it's not going to affect anything, okay? When throughput is about equal to capacity, we say the bottleneck is internal, and we need to increase throughput by increasing capacity. Now here's where the next link comes into play. If capacity is close to theoretical capacity, we don't have much waste in the process, and so there's probably not room there, and so we might have to think about adding equipment, okay? But if there's a gap between capacity and theoretical capacity, we can say, well, we should attack that and figure out where that waste is, and can we take it out of the process. So you can see how understanding those three pieces of information can help lead you to maybe what actions you want to take for process improvement, okay? So that's why I specifically asked you to calculate that for your processes that you're evaluating, so you can look and say, okay, and in most cases, the ones that we've looked at here, we have had the gap between capacity and theoretical capacity. There's usually waste in the process that we can look at and attack, okay? So, and if capacity is significantly lower than theoretical capacity, existing resources are not being utilized efficiently, and there may be an opportunity to eliminate waste. So I would come back to this slide when you're trying to do that part of your project and make sure that you're thinking through what that is, okay? What those relationships are. if we want to increase resource levels, we have some options. We were talking about that earlier. What options would you take if would you really hire one more person? Well, you can increase the number of resource units, so you can just hire more people. Okay. You can increase the size of the resource units. If we're talking about labor, maybe we're saying instead of working 8 hours a day, maybe they work overtime, and now it's 10 hours a day. Okay. You can increase the time of the operation. Sorry. So increase the size of the resource units is going to be, maybe if you've got some equipment and you can make it larger to handle a larger number at one time. Or you can subcontract or outsource, or you can speed up the rate at which activities are performed. Okay, and just say go faster, go faster, go faster. Okay, most cases, it's always interesting if you think about continuous improvement. The actual transformation of a product oftentimes is only about 10 to 20% of the total time it takes to get something to the customer. Okay, and we tend to focus on when we need to cut costs, or we tend to focus on the manufacturing side of it in a manufacturing scenario. And there's this whole long process of the customer order getting placed, the order getting to the manufacturing plant, and the delivery from that point forward. And so when you're thinking about process, don't just focus on that one piece. Especially those that do well in continuous improvement, they tend to focus across the board. I'm sorry, that must be 1 hour and 11 minutes, right? I was thinking that had stopped for a second, and I was like, uh-oh. That means that I'll be upstairs redoing this when we're done, and I was really not signing up for that. Okay, so that's if we want to increase resource levels, that's what we can do. Okay, if we want to reduce resource capacity waste, you look for those non-value added activities. You try to figure out how you can avoid defects. Those welders, they were not intended to work that way. They were intended to work correctly. So if you can figure out how to repair that and get it to work correctly, okay. If you can take away breakdowns, lost time. One of the things that we focus on a lot in terms of manufacturing is setup time. In the custom plant, sometimes we would do custom doors that were just beautiful, right? And they would have these big, wide profiles. But you may only have one custom door like that. And to set it up to go through the equipment, it might take 10 to 15 minutes to change over the equipment to do that one setup. And we did an event and came in and we set up a series of heads that you could put one end this way to do the most common door type, and then you could flip it and put the other one in to do the next common, and that took the setup time from 10 to 15 minutes per door down to just maybe a minute for each of those that you had to flip it over, and so that really can make a difference in the long run. From when I think about setup time in a service operation, I don't know whether you call it setup time, but when they transition from one customer to another, what do they have to do, and how do they do they have to, if it's the sandwich shop, are there cleanup things that they have to do between customers, or that they should be doing between customers, right? What you do is you look for your bottleneck resource and you try to take those activities that you can off your bottleneck and move them to other resources, okay? You try to reduce interference waste, which occurs because of lack of synchronization among your resources, where you have the starving or the blocking because of the bottleneck, okay? So again, those are some ways that we can reduce resource capacity waste. The key to remember with continuous improvement is you're never done. So you figure out what the bottleneck issue is and you solve it at that particular workstation, okay? Now you have someplace else that's a bottleneck. And so you shift your focus there. So that's why we call it the improvement spiral, right? I'm always continuing to work to find the next bottleneck to make it better, At some point, that bottleneck is going to become external, and you're not going to have enough sales for the capacity that you have. That's fine. Then you figure out how you're going to increase your sales. And as you read through the goal, have you guys reached that point in the goal where they want more volume? So it's kind of Alex gets to this fun spot in the book where he's like, in order for me to make the amount of money that I need to make, I need them to bring in more orders, and they're not believing that I can do that.
No,
and
I didn't break the toilet part.
What's that?
I said I think I'm right before that part.
And then you think about this throughput profit multiplier, and that's exactly what they deal with, is their fixed costs are already in play, right? And they're a union shop, and so their labor is pretty well already, they're there whether or not they're working or not, kind of a thing. And so if they have capacity, bringing that in is going to be more than just, that's where they get that throughput profit multiplier. But again, we've got that ongoing cycle of improvement. Okay. I want to look at this for a quick second. When you work the problems, I want you to, you're going to need to go back to that table 5.1 and start there, and then kind of the next thing, and in 5.1, we were just dealing with one type of product, right? And then whenever you're dealing with more than one type of product, like when we did the physician claims and the hospital claims, that's when you need to set up and come up with the artificial unit load, okay? And so I would make sure that you have, I'd just go ahead and print out the PowerPoint and kind of keep it next to you, the examples next to you as you go through. And you start out exercise 5.1, and you've got a unit load for a shopping contract and a unit load for a medical contract, right? And so you're starting out right away. They don't give you the easy one. You go right away where you've got two products. Okay, so you'll have to calculate an artificial unit load and go from there. Okay? All right. I think that's enough to digest, and I think you working on those problems is going to probably be your best bet. And again, my view, whether you handle it this way or not, is I'm thinking this week's a good week to work on the problems. I'll be giving the feedback on the projects, and then next week you can work on your projects. We will meet back here on October 13th. Okay? You guys have a great fall break.
Have fun on your college visit.
I am looking forward to it.
Don't cry. My mom just went on one with my little sister, and she almost cried. Please don't cry.
I don't think that'll be an issue. I mean,
My mom cried even when I told her not to. I told her every time she sees me here, I tell her, "Don't cry, Mom." She's like, "Okay."
Yeah, my mom cried. That's great.
I think I have only had a meltdown at one time, and it was a combination of things. So I'm really not looking for that combination to come
My
up this
senior
weekend.
year, when we got cap and gowns, I got home, and I put my cap and gown on when I got out of my truck, and then walked into the house with my cap and gown on, because I knew it'd make my mom cry, and she just lost it. I was just like...
I'll tell you the one that gets me every year, even if I don't have a senior, is at our church, the seniors get up and do the sermon. And we've been going there for 10 years, and every year, every time those seniors get up, I'm like, yeah! All right, you guys have a great time. We'll see you.
We're going left. We're going left. We're not going right.
See you, Harley. Bye, Corey. Have a good break.